if a government imposes itself on a society by rigging elections and not winning government by a popular vote, then that government naturally can't tolerate freedom of the press. It can't tolerate the criticisms that flow from its commission of fraud at elections year after year. So from 1968, as I said, to 1985, we had massively rigged elections. And naturally, out of that will spring an authoritarian government and will create an authoritarian environment which is the antithesis of freedom of every type, including freedom of expression and freedom of the press. So the state in Guyana for 30 years monopolized the press and controlled the press. And certainly did not encourage criticism, but penalized renowned Guyanese journalist Ricky Singh was forced to flee this land. Mirror, the official organ of the People's Progressive Party, challenged a law that was passed by the Forbes-Burnham administration, which required the Minister of Trade to grant permission to import newsprint into Guyana. And the challenge was, if a discretionary power to grant, you're giving a discretionary power to refuse. And newsprint is so integral, then that minister can lawfully refuse newsprint being imported. And newsprint was not available locally. And if the minister refused to grant newsprint permission to import newsprint, then we can't print the newspapers. Then you are depriving me of my freedom to express myself. And that was the case filed. The case went to the Court of Appeal of Guyana. Naturally, a dictatorship doesn't want an exterior court. So they abolished all appeals that was available then to the Privy Council. They removed the Privy Council from the court structure. So the Guyana Court of Appeal became the highest court. They took the flag of the PNC and they put it on top of that court to show you who controlled that court. And that court ruled that importation of newsprint is not connected to freedom of expression. Can you believe that? That importation of newsprint, you can't print the paper without newsprint. And our Court of Appeal ruled that newsprint has no relationship with freedom of expression. And they dismissed the case. At the same time, a case of almost identical facts was filed in Trinidad by a man named Chocolingo. It went all the way to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council ruled that newsprint was integral to freedom of expression. The Guyana Court of Appeal, the same year, ruled that newsprint is not integral to freedom of expression. And right there, you saw the reason why countries in the Caribbean were advancing and Guyana was stagnating because they had the Privy Council and we had a Court of Appeal upon whose roof the governing party flew its party flag, not the national flag. That simple example explains and illustrates the importance of an independent judiciary to an evolving society and to economic and social progress. Just fast forward to 2020 and think what would have happened in Guyana if we did not have the CCJ. Just think about that. Think about that, confidence motion and all the other cases. If the appeal died at the Court of Appeal and we had no higher court. And we must reflect upon these things. So that was the state of freedom of expression in Guyana. Moses Nagamootoo, who became Prime Minister of an APNU AFC government, can tell you how many times he was brutalized as a journalist under the PNC government. But he's ashamed to say those things because he joined the dictators. Fast forward again, when they had a one-seat majority in the parliament, and they used that one-seat majority to cut the budgets of the government, including the budgets to Guyana Information Agency, NCN, the radio stations, and the Chronicle newspapers. The state, all the state media, they slashed to $1. We must not forget these things. That constituted an assault on freedom of the press because the state has a duty to disseminate information to the citizenry. And APNU AFC, enjoying a one-seat majority, slashed the budgetary agencies of the state responsible for disseminating information to the public. All the state media budgets were cut to $1. That is what they did. Again, Ricky Singh features prominently. Ricky Singh was then, during the 2015 to 2017, 2020 period, was writing for the Chronicle newspaper. He wrote an article in which he spoke critically about the diminution of portfolio responsibility for Moses Nagamootoo as Prime Minister, saying diminished Prime Minister in the Caribbean because he had the least powers of Prime Ministers in the region. And for that, Ricky Singh was again exiled. And up to today, well, he's no longer, I don't know what is the state of his health, but he was banished from writing in the Chronicle newspaper. And that's just a couple of years ago. Just a couple of years ago. I recite all those factors and those historical occurrences for you to compare that period with what obtains now. And you see the great disparity and the freedom which now permeates the atmosphere, the environment in Guyana, including freedom of the press. In 2013, our government passed the Freedom of Information Act in this country to allow the citizens and political opposition to have a legal and institutional right and access to information within the government and the state apparatus. But we have an inefficient and incompetent opposition. They wouldn't write, but they would walk around wholly quarreling that they don't get this document. Who would they ever ask for these documents? Every day or every week, I try to at least make one public disclosure, either in writing or in a television engagement, divulging information about our government, more particularly my sector. And every minister does that. Almost every week, President Mohamed Irfan Ali engages the press, either through the social media or through the formal media. And that's the difference which exists today. But I can't close this issue of freedom of the press without speaking to the corresponding duties and obligations which devolve upon the press. It is common knowledge that no freedom is absolute. Any freedom that is absolute is antisocial. Freedom of expression is now guaranteed by our Constitution, has a list of conditionalities to which it is subject. And we must bear those conditionalities in mind. We must not only remember the freedom and the right, but we must remember the duties and obligations which go concomitantly with those rights and freedoms. And our press must be alive to these limitations and obligations. They are as equally important as the right itself. So there are certain times where you have to restrict freedom, and the Constitution says it. This is the document that gives you the right, and this is the document that tells you how the right is limited. It is limited in certain instances when it is reasonably required to do so in the interest of defense, public order, and public safety and public health. There is also a limitation when it comes to protecting the rights, reputation, and freedoms of other people. So you have a freedom of expression and a right to publish, but you can't publish something that is defamatory of me and attacks my reputation. It also restricts use of telephone and telegraphy in the public interest. And that's why you have legislation that allows for interception of telephone conversation if crime is if it threatens national security. And this is not in relation to Guyana alone. This obtains right across the world. When you're a public officer, you are required to maintain confidentiality in certain information that you receive as part of your functions. So when, as a public officer, you can't speak to certain matters, it's not a deprivation of your freedom of expression. The Constitution limits that and puts an obligation upon you. You can leave the job and you operate as a free agent. But once you are working with the state and information comes into your domain due to your function, and it is in the interest of the state to protect that information, you cannot divulge it. And the Constitution also limits political party, persons and institutions from disseminating racial information which may result in ethnic divisions among the people of Guyana. And that must be emphasized. It says that imposes restrictions upon any person, institution, body, authority, or political party from taking any action or advancing, disseminating, or supporting any idea which may result in racial or ethnic division among the people of Guyana. And most importantly, the article says this: freedom of expression in this article does not relate to hate speeches or other expressions in whatever form capable of exciting hostility or ill will against any person or class of persons. So anytime you are speaking or writing or expressing yourself in a manner to cause or excite hatred or racial hostilities among or between the citizens of Guyana, you have no right to do so. Freedom of expression in this article, guaranteed by the Constitution, doesn't extend to that. It doesn't cover that. So when people are being charged for exciting racial hostilities, I hear the uninformed shouting freedom of expression. That's not freedom of expression. Read the law. You have no freedom to preach racism. You have no freedom to excite ethnic strife and to preach hatred and violence. You have no such freedom. The Constitution tells you that. In the same way that you have no freedom of expression to cry fire in a crowded building, you have no freedom to excite racial hostilities in Guyana. And that's the law. And I have a beautiful quotation from Chief Justice Wooding of Trinidad and Tobago speaking about freedom generally. He said this in a case of Collymore against the Attorney General in 1967, 50 years ago, but it rings true to today. He says this, I quote, "The freedom to associate confers neither right nor license for a course of conduct or for the commission of acts which in the view of Parliament are inimical to peace, order, and good government of the country. In like manner, their constitutionally guaranteed existence notwithstanding, freedom of movement is no license for trespass, freedom of conscience no license for sedition, freedom of expression no license for obscenity, freedom of assembly no license for riot, and freedom of the press no license for libel," unquote. So when we speak about freedoms generally, we must also, with the same breath, speak to the concomitant and corresponding responsibilities and duties that are so intricately tied to the exercise of those freedoms. So tomorrow, as we celebrate Press Freedom Day, a great day indeed, and the press is a great medium in allowing people to communicate and in the nurturing of a free, democratic, and thinking society, we must simultaneously recognize the obligations and the duties which go hand in hand with this great freedom. I have gone over the program time, so I want to thank you very much for spending the last hour with me. I believe that we have covered some important issues in our discussions, and until next week, I want to say goodbye, but before I do so, on May the 5th, that's Friday coming, we will be celebrating Arrival Day. And I want to take this opportunity to salute all of our people who arrived in this country. And I believe on May the 5th is the day that the East Indians first arrived. I want to, in particular, salute the East Indians of our country and wish all of our people a happy and enjoyable arrival day on May the 5th. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.